Hi, my name is James Andriella, and you're listening to the Back to Human podcast. Joining me today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Julian Bermudez of Psychedelic Integration Trauma Therapy. In this episode, we will be taking a journey into psychedelic journeys and exploring ways that Julian helps his clients come back to themselves through somatic work, meditation, and honest self-inquiry. Without further ado, Julian, welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me, James.
Would you mind letting me and my audience know what led you to pursue a therapeutic practice that incorporates psychedelics?
I was going through my own healing journey, um, and through the process of learning about trauma, addictions, and how to heal those, I found some wonderful teachers and found all the literature on psychedelic therapy. And that's what led me down this path was training with specific people and following the literature, and then mostly, foremost, just working on my own stuff.
Hmm. What literature did you come across? Was there like certain books, certain authors?
Yeah, when I was in undergraduate in psychology, I was just reviewing the medical literature, all of the studies that were done during the 60s, 70s, 50s, and all the current literature that's out there of people who, and a bunch of other people who are still working with psychedelic therapy in that sense.
And would these be like psychedelics such as LSD, psilocybin, anything in particular?
The literature covers a wide range. So there was LSD studies all through the 50s and 60s. They were very common. There were people like Stanislav Grof who were doing studies, continuing that. He was one of the few people who had full um, licensure or exposure to continue doing those studies. And then there's Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies who they have all sorts of IRB and DEA exemptions to and FDA exemptions to continue those studies. So
What were you personally working on, if you don't mind being a little bit vulnerable here? What was showing up in your life at the time, and how did you integrate after exposure to psychedelics?
Mhm. Well, to answer that, maybe I should just tell you a little bit about who I am, just in a nutshell, and how that led me to this. Is that what we're looking for?
That works too.
Okay. Yeah. So I was born in the Detroit metro area in 1987. My parents were my dad was 19 and my mom was 21, and they were very different cultures and races at the time. My mom, her mother was from Germany, moved here after the war, and my dad, his dad was from Puerto Rico, and his mom was Native Mexican. And they moved here um, right before he was born. So there were very stark differences in my parents, and they didn't like each other, to say the least. And so that's what I came into. And needless to say, they didn't want me at that age, and with all of those complexities. There were times where they needed me, but they never wanted me. And so for the first 12, 13 years of my life, I was just bouncing back and forth when they were playing hot potato, essentially. And the message that I internalized was that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't worthy. I wasn't liked. I wasn't worthy of being loved. I was defective in some way because when I would model my mom, as children do, my dad and that community hated me. And they would call me white trash and all of these other things because my mom lived in a trailer park outside of Detroit. And then when I go to my mom's house and my dad lived in Detroit and I would speak that language and carry those customs, well, they hated me over there. Highly segregated, very racist areas. So um, the messages that I got was, again, that I wasn't good enough. And when I got into my 20s, the pain from that childhood was just so great. It was so intense that just living was a big struggle. And I had some very difficult times and some wake up calls that hit me in my early 20s. And I was, excuse me, I was adapting to that pain by distracting and disconnecting and numbing that pain through things like various addictions. I started drinking a lot. I was getting into prescription drugs. And I had a lot of other distractions. Like I put myself in very dangerous situations. I was engaging in high adrenaline sports, things of that nature. And when I started coming out of it, I changed all of those addictions to becoming intellectual and academic, and then studying psychology, trying to figure out how to transform or heal this pain. And so I replaced one addiction with another, and that's what actually led me down this path. And it was after about 7 or 8 years of really studying the psychedelic literature before I really started trying it out on my own and really having these experiences. There's a big difference between reading it and experiencing it, of course.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was when things actually started to really move in terms of healing that pain for me.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that, brother. I resonate a lot with that story. Not necessarily the same situation. Everyone's story is a little bit different. But I myself am adopted, and I personally didn't realize it at the time, but I was engaging behaviors that were similar. And I also had that kind of worthiness conversation where I didn't understand. I was just a little baby, and all of a sudden, from day one, I was ripped away from mom and dad. They were very young at the time, so older me, I understood, but those same feelings, they were internalized as a little baby, and I didn't feel like I really grew up in a safe space. Not to say that my adoptive family didn't provide me with a safe home and everything like that, but still, that's kind of a trauma that isn't really reconcilable just through understanding alone. Like it needs to be dealt with. And that internalized pain was manifesting in other ways for myself. So I would say a functioning alcoholic at one point. I was very angry. I was very jealous myself. And it was honestly a psychedelic experience, which for me was psilocybin mushrooms, that really opened up my mind and allowed me to view myself and my behaviors from a different point of view, which made me realize that this is a destructive path. And if I do not change something, this is only going to get worse. And all my relationships are going to deteriorate, which at the time they were. But I would say that psilocybin and my first psychedelic experience really opened up my eyes and just allowed me to reflect more and see why exactly I was doing certain things. And as you were stating that you were kind of trading one thing for another, you took destructive behaviors and then you went to the other extreme, but now it's like maybe still compensating a little bit with too much reading and studying and such and researching until you actually integrated these medicines yourself.
Yeah, that's right, James. Um, yeah, when we're kids and when we're children and we're going through those traumatic experiences, um, our worldview consists primarily of ourselves and the immediate people around us. And we're very egotistical in the sense when we're children that the world is about us. We're the center of the world. So, in our situations where our parents were disconnected from us, the only way that we can make sense of that as children is it's my fault. In fact, you know, for children going through trauma, especially when it involves parents or caregivers, uh, there's only two ways that we can really make sense of what's happening. The first way is that I'm in tremendous pain. My parents, my caregivers, whoever's around me, they're not up to the task, right? I'm not getting the care that I need. I'm disconnected from my parents. They're not present, whatever it is, so on and so forth. In other words, I'm not safe.
Mm.
And that's kind of a hopeless outlook for a child. It doesn't have a lot of options and opportunity to overcome that pain. But the second option is actually a survival mechanism, which is, well, my parents do know what's going on. My caregivers do know what's going on. They're older. They're surviving. They got connections. They know how to care for others and for themselves. The problem is, I'm not worthy of that care. I'm not good enough for that care. So if I could be good enough, if I could do the things that they need me to do, if I could be worthy of it, then I will get the care that I deserve.
Mhm,
And so then we get on this pursuit of trying to be good enough. And of course, trying to numb the pain of not being good enough, which is, you know, very painful for a child like yourself who gets removed from their parents at an early age.
mhm,
Or for myself, being abandoned and tossed around by parents not being wanted. So this is a survival mechanism that we develop. It's wonderful. It helps us in the short term, but then those distractions, those disconnections, the ways of numbing that pain, not knowing how to deal with it, yeah, it becomes detrimental to us later in life. And yeah, that's what happened to me. I absolutely traded out one addiction for the next, and my self-worth was dependent on how intellectual, how intelligent I could be, how well could I communicate ideas, how much status could I acquire and power could I acquire and respect could I acquire so I could do these types of things. And it wasn't until I really stepped away from all of that and left all of those fields and really started to focus in on that pain that I was carrying, stopped running from it, and really started to engage and work with it. That's where some real transformation happened for me.
mhm. So I'm personally a father. I don't know if you have kids yourself now. And I've read through some of your articles on your webpage. And what I like is that you touch on that this stuff starts early. A lot of people don't really consider that at all. They don't consider things like even birth traumas, prenatal care for pregnant mamas as well, and then just early upbringing. And when my wife asked me the other day, it's like, what would I want for Jax? Like, I want him to be free. Jax is my son. I want him to be free. And then I also want him to be able to feel, like, feel emotions and not have to, like, suppress them. So that way, hopefully, it doesn't manifest in a detrimental way. And I'm reading a book right now, and similar to what you stated, that there's certain mechanisms that children have in order to survive in whatever environment they are. And it states that if, say, for instance, a child's throwing a tantrum and they are having some big emotions, and then instead of actually trying to sit with them, understand, and try to just have them express themselves. If let them sit in a room and you let them cry it out, which I'm pretty sure you mentioned in your articles too, or even for sleep training and such like that, if they're just crying it out, then what's going to happen if you yelled at them before this or um, some type of argument happened between parent and child? That now their only two mechanisms are they either will tell themselves that I'm not worthy enough, I'm a bad kid, or that they will start to persuade themselves that what they just experienced is not reality. Like, that's not true. Because if that was true, then mom and dad would have apologized and they would be here comforting me. So they almost begin to lie to themselves. And what happens as an adult now is they begin to distrust their own intuition. So with things like cry it out, how have you seen that this can potentially manifest as an adult?
James, you're hitting on one of the biggest traumas or the biggest results of traumas right there, which is a disconnection from oneself. So there's this dichotomy that children have at a very early age, which is there's two fundamental needs that every child has. And the first one is for attachment, connection. We can't survive without it. Human beings are the most immature, undeveloped, dependent species that we can identify in this world for the longest amount of time. Uh, a human being is completely dependent on their parents for 15, 18, 20 years, maybe even longer, to where a horse runs on the first day of its life. It'll take a human being 2, 3, 4 years to develop those neural patterns, motor skills to do the exact same behavior. So the first need that humans have is to be attached to their parents. The second need that we have, which is equally as important, is for authenticity, meaning that emotions, we can ask for needs, our needs can be met, We can express boundaries when they're not being met. We can be uniquely who we are. And further, we can relax into the relationship with our parents, meaning that when we express emotions, when we have fits of anger or fear or sadness, that's not going to threaten the relationship with our parents. But what happens when what you just described as the child's having big emotions and the parent is reading modern psychology or modern parenting expertise that says when your child is throwing an anger tantrum, you need to put them in a timeout. You need to send them to their room and let them cry it out until they can regulate, and then they can come back to the attachment. In other words, we're going to threaten the child with the thing that's most important to them, the relationship. So the message that a child gets here is that if I express my emotions, which are there for a reason, there's signals from the body, perhaps about unmet needs, or perhaps about navigating the environment. And rather than being comforted and guided in how to identify these emotions, how to express them, how to process them, how to soothe them, they get disconnected. So they lose the thing that's most important to them. Well, the message is that I have to sacrifice my emotions. And we have to choose. The child has to choose between the attachment and their authenticity. We can't survive without the attachment, but you can survive by sacrificing yourself. And so these emotions that are coming from the body, the fear, the anger, the shame, the sadness, we learn very early on that those are bad, that if I express these, it's going to result in disconnection. It's going to result in a threat to my survival. I won't be accepted. I won't be valued. I might get punished. I might get hurt. It might become a direct threat to my survival. If I express anger for not getting my needs met, there might be somebody around me who might actually physically harm me or further. So the message is quite clear. Sacrifice your emotions. Emotions are bad. Stuff them down. Disconnect from them. And this avoiding of emotions, this avoiding of pain becomes the source of great suffering. It leads to addictions. It leads to all sorts of physical disease, emotional disconnects, mental diseases, you name it. This is the source of great pain. It's one of the biggest traumas that we can experience is the disconnection from ourselves.
Mhm. I agree. And I've had a previous guest on that mentions like the behavior of an addict that is allowing them to survive. Like that's it's serving a purpose. So if you're just wanting someone to remove alcohol from their life or whatever other addiction it is, and you don't address what the underlying need is, it's just going either it's not going to resolve, it's going to come back because that need is still there, or it's going to turn into something else, which it kind of did in this case. So, or for you, how you went from one extreme to the other. And I saw it with myself too. Like I have a whole bookcase over here, and I've thought about it sometimes where I'm like, I wonder if the reason why I read so much is I want to feel like I'm smart, and then that way people can come to me for some type of information. So what you said earlier really resonates with me. Now, in one of your articles, you've stated that resisting the emotion, as you were saying with like the kids and how they're giving up their authenticity, it's almost like they're beginning at a very, very early age to start putting on these masks where, okay, if I'm going to interact with these people, this is exactly how I need to act. So, I mean, we see it in adults too. I've felt it personally myself where it's like the only way that I can interact with these people is if I am this person, not my true authentic self. So, with your article where you state resisting emotion gives it more control over us, how does that show up?
Well, resisting emotion gives us a little bit of autonomy in the moment. So when we learn that pattern, so as we were given the examples of children who are forced to choose between their authenticity and their attachments, this gives them a little bit of agency in the sense, but there's no real choice that's being made here. This becomes an unconscious pattern that is ingrained very early in life. It was something that helps us very at a very young age, but it becomes a source of great pain later on, as we're noticing here. When we sacrifice ourselves, when we stuff these things down, we disconnect from a part of ourselves. We're we're exiling or banishing a part of us, and we're judging and criticizing it. And so then we have all of these adaptations that will build on top of that to cover up this pain. We'll try our hardest to be good enough. We'll find other ways to distract or disconnect from the pain, whether that's through substances or behaviors. So, as you were just mentioning in terms of addictions, the addictions always serve a purpose. There was some kind of wisdom, there was some survival mechanism that was inherent in that. And when I work with people who are coming in with an addiction, that's one of the first things I want to look at. The things that go wrong is obvious. They'll come in and tell me I lost my family, I lost my connections, I lost my job, I lost all my material items, I lost my health, so on and so forth. But what was working for you? What was the driving factor underneath that led you to lose all those things? And it's almost always something very similar, as it numbs the pain that we were in. It gives us some peace of mind. It helps us navigate the stress and the pain and the turbulence, the very harsh criticalness that we have inside of us. So yeah, if we can figure out ways to not run away from those emotions anymore,
Mm.
not avoid that pain that we're in, but instead try to face it, try to get very curious about it, understand where this pain comes from, understand what circumstances it arose in and what unmet needs were there. Then we can try to meet those needs in healthy, constructive ways. And if we can do that, then the addiction that was there, that was trying to meet those needs, becomes less important and less needed. And that's one of the practices that we'll work on so we can gain a lot more agency and autonomy in our lives and ultimately liberate ourselves from those old patterns by working directly with that pain and trying to understand what wisdom that addiction had to begin with.
There's a very cliche saying, it's like, in order to heal it, you must feel it. And just what you're saying right now, it's almost as if at a very young age, many of us have been trained to just suppress these emotions as if it's dangerous in order to do so. So a lot of people, speaking generally here, but may have completely lost those sensations or those feelings, those emotions. That's why I said this is what I want for my kid. It's like I want him to be able to feel things and not just be this kind of numbed out zombie that is on autopilot waiting to die, not really living. When I began to incorporate psychedelics, mainly microdosing, I personally microdose. I haven't been on any big journeys myself. Um, what I noticed is it would kind of peel back in layers. This may have been true for you. I would like to hear how your story or your integration went. But it was very, very subtle with this microdosing where these thoughts would come up. I would see things from a different lens, from a different point of view. And then because now it's coming to my awareness to the forefront and it's not just no longer buried behind either food, alcohol, other addictions, I'm giving myself time to actually process this. Now I can find out ways that I can move throughout life without letting this kind of run in the background in the subconscious. So, what was it like for you when you began this type of therapy? And what's it like for your clients too, if you can divulge into that too?
So you're mentioning these intergenerational patterns of trauma here. So at an early age, based off of your circumstances, you learned a few things to disconnect and suppress your emotions. And these core beliefs of I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy developed. And so now you want something different for your son, of course, right? And the thing about intergenerational trauma is it spreads to the next generation very quickly and very easily and unintentionally and unconsciously. We don't intend to give these things to our children, but that's what intergenerational trauma does. It spreads very easily on its own. So if you're actively working to help your son to develop the capacity to feel these emotions, to process, to identify them, to express them, to soothe them, and to be in tune with them, the best way to do that is to do that work yourself, as you're talking about. In neuroscience, what Dan Siegel refers to as interpersonal neurobiology is that what the child, the baby, doesn't have the capacity to regulate emotions on their own. They develop that capacity by essentially downloading that information from a mature, regulated nervous system. But what happens if the parents are not mature or regulated themselves, if they're avoiding their pain, if they're carrying around lots of unprocessed pain or they're disconnecting from their emotions? This is exactly what the child downloads. So, in order to really reclaim some agency over that pattern, we have to do that work ourselves. And so, when I work with the client, the first thing that we try to do is take an honest, truthful inventory of these patterns, the same patterns that you're talking about right now, the beliefs about ourselves, the disconnecting from emotions, the way that we distract and disconnect and numb the emotions, and what purpose they serve. And once we can really identify all of these patterns, then we try to build a relationship with the pattern. So if I have tremendous pain inside of me and I'm avoiding it, I'm distracting it from it, I'm trying to get rid of it, I'm fighting it, I want it to go away. Instead of running away from it, I'm going to try to cultivate a practice where I sit with it and I make time all throughout the day, multiple times a day, to sit still, to get rid of the distractions for just a few moments and to focus in on that feeling and to try to connect with it, to try to relate with it, to try to understand it and get to know it, and to see what the unmet needs underneath it were. And then as I continue to develop this practice, I'm going to try to nurture myself by doing those things that I needed. The more and more that I can cultivate this practice just from sitting here talking like this or doing it on my own, when we have a psychedelic experience, rather than that pain coming up and being this big, scary monster that I didn't want to interact with, I'm going to go intentionally and try and use the psychedelic experience as a way to connect with that pain. And then I'm going to go in there and do all those things that I needed that I didn't get. So if I needed somebody to be with me, to listen to me, to understand me, to comfort me, to accept me, to validate me, and to stay with me and help me comfort and soothe these emotions, that's what I'm going to do during that experience. And that's the practice that we try to build, even without the psychedelic assistance. So we'll go through this every single day, multiple times a day, just sitting with ourselves, trying to connect with that pain and build a capacity to sit with it and process it and identify it and express it and soothe it in real time.
So you mentioned intention there. It's like you are willfully opening up the closet door to the big scary monster that may be there, or you're taking a peek underneath the bed. What if someone doesn't know what's there? So say for instance, I was scared the first time that I tried mushrooms. I didn't know what I was going to experience. I figured I would see gummy bears or little gnomes jumping all over the place, but that wasn't really the case. Um, what if you don't go in with some type of intention? Could that potentially lead to a bad experience?
I would categorize a bad experience as one of two things or both. The first one is that we resist what's coming up. We say, I don't want that. I don't want to deal with it. I don't like it. I want it to go away. And we try to run away from it. We try to fight it. We try to get rid of it, so on. The second thing is we say, I don't want that. I want this. This is not how I wanted it to go. I want rainbows, butterflies, beaches, whatever. Yeah, if we do one or both of those, we'll have a very difficult time. And so what we try to do is develop the capacity to look for these things that are uncomfortable, to sit with the pain, to sit with the emotions, to identify them, and to actively work with them. And the more that we do this, the more comfortable with being uncomfortable we become, the more of the capacity to sit with our emotions and our pain that we develop, the more safety we'll have inside of ourselves. Once we can start to build this safety with ourselves, the more of this pain that's buried and disconnected deep inside of us, which is buried and disconnected for a reason. It was the survival mechanism. We didn't have the capacity to face it or to process it in that moment. And so, this wonderful mechanism of disconnecting stepped in to protect us. But once we get safe enough inside of ourselves to face that pain, we don't need that survival mechanism anymore. And so we start to find more and more buried emotions, buried memories, buried patterns that we have that are always here. We always can feel it. It's inside the body. It's just unconscious. We're not aware of it. And it it really doesn't matter how deep or how painful those experiences are. The more that we can get comfortable with those, the more that they will start to show themselves once we're ready to process them, once we really can build the capacity to process pain.
Because of that, would you say that it's more effective to do these type of therapies with a practitioner, with guidance, or did you do it with did you have a guide when you began this?
I don't ever want to tell anybody what to do with their own experiences. Um, I can tell you right now, I've seen lots of people who have done this on their own, who wanted to have psychedelic experiences and didn't have the right or the proper preparation beforehand and didn't have support with them during it. So when these things start to come up, they don't know how to deal with it. And it becomes even more traumatizing. This happened to me in the very beginning too. When I first started taking my first large experience was a lot of pain that I had buried down and tried my best to disconnect from came bursting up to the surface. And I was not prepared to work with it. And afterwards, that pain stayed with me. I couldn't just not see it now. It was right there on the surface. And it was very threatening, to say the least. So I won't ever tell anybody what to do with their own experience, but I highly recommend having somebody to help you go through it. Now, 15 years ago, finding somebody to help you go through this was very difficult and challenging. But now, I mean, there's people all over the place that can do it. So taking some time, finding a person who can really work with you, can really see you, that you can feel comfortable and safe with, somebody that you can begin to open up with, somebody who's going to help you find all of this pain that might be disconnected, make sense of your patterns, and can help you formulate intentions and understand why these patterns are here, these disconnections, these addictions, these distractions, what purpose they serve, and ultimately to help you identify when you're in those patterns, when those beliefs of I'm not good enough are showing up, um, and when you're following an old pattern that was there to help you in the past, they're very sneaky, very difficult to identify sometimes. So having somebody there with you, I think, is crucial. Um, if I could go back and have somebody there with me from the beginning, I would do it, no question. But that wasn't available at that time. So yeah, I highly recommend having somebody there. I always have somebody when I do it, and even my very experienced colleagues and friends who are very familiar in these areas, they'll do the same thing too. It's the standard practices to have support. You don't have to do this alone, right? Even the idea of I have to go in this, I have to figure this out, I have to be strong, I have to be independent, I have to be smart. These are all just another version of the I'm not good enough. This is the same thing. I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving. And this is just another area where we want to identify it and see that we don't have to heal, we don't have to do this in isolation. We can have support. We can have people there to help us go through this. We don't have to do it alone.
Mhm. And that's why you would reach out to someone like yourself. And what you stated there, um, doing on your own, that's definitely something that I personally had to overcome. I wouldn't be surprised if this also stems from my adoption, where I kind of felt like I was all alone and I just had to trust these people and pray, even though I didn't really know how to pray at the time, that I'd be safe, which I really admire your clarity, by the way, brother. You're very well spoken. It seems like you would need quite a bit of time to integrate this type of stuff then for an effective therapy. So, how would someone that is a very successful businessman approach this then? Is this something that they would do over the weekend? Could they do this in microdoses daily? Do they need to go on a work hiatus?
Yeah. When I work with somebody, well, first of all, again, I won't tell anybody how they have to do this. But what I would want to say is if somebody's really busy, very successful by societal standards, they have all of these obligations, responsibilities, tasks. What I would want to know is why? What does that do for you? In other words, why do you have to have those things? What does it provide for you? Is it a sense of value? Is it a sense of respect? Is it a sense of control? Because as you just mentioned, yeah, in your life, you had a loss of control. You were just at the whim of the people who were around you. And so feeling safe with other people can be very, very challenging. Feeling safe just in general can be very challenging. To go into a very vulnerable, um, open situation with somebody else can be very, very challenging. And these are things that we would want to look at. So yeah, if somebody is very busy and they got all of the seasons of life, I would want to look at what purpose that serves for them. And if it's a distraction, if it's a disconnection, if it's a way of um, f- obtaining a sense of feeling valued or safe in this world, those are things that we'll really want to look at. When I work with people, I work with them for a minimum of 4 weeks before they have any sort of psychedelic experience. That's just that's how I work with people. Each appointment that we have is either an hour and a half or 2 hours long. And we spend a good amount of time really looking into these patterns, really looking into these beliefs, looking at what we do with our emotions and our relationship with ourselves, which when we do this, as you're seeing here, these things come right up. It's not very hard to find them.
Mhm.
And then we really start building that practice long before we have any psychedelic experience. So ideally, the skills, the tools, the resources that we need to heal this pain is already being nurtured and developed, and it's maturing right now. It's inside of you already. It's just a matter of reconnecting with it. And then once you have your psychedelic experience, that's such a small part of this overall journey that we're doing here. It's just a way to go from the conceptual thinking ideas and all of the mental understanding into a much deeper embodiment of practicing caring for ourselves and practicing soothing and identifying and comforting these emotions and expressing them. And once we got that in place, I just get out of the way. and You'll run into roadblocks, you'll hit speed bumps. Of course, we always get stuck. I still get stuck. My teacher still gets stuck and he's in his 80s.
Mm.
It's not uncommon, and that's why we have support. That's why we have community. That's why we have people around us. Just because when we were younger we didn't have that doesn't mean that it always has to be that way. So these are the things that we do. We try to spend a lot of time really building the practice, and then we use the psychedelic experience as a tool to go deeper and embody it.
Mhm. I knew that was going to be a response, like for someone that's very, very successful. It's like, well, why? How does that serve you? And I guess that's a scary question to ask, is who would you be if you aren't who you are? So with helping someone come back to themselves, what does that mean? How do you know that you've reached this point? Or is it like a never-ending journey? Is it possible to reach a clean slate where you don't have any type of negative karmic relationships and you have the purest babies because they are not carrying any of your stuff?
There's no end destination here. We're not trying to reach a point where everything's healed. I'm great. I drink green tea and I don't want to slap people. Um, this is going to be a continuous practice for the rest of our lives. And if you just think about it, when we go through pain when we're children, and when our environments are uncontrollable, unpredictable, stressful situations, and we don't have the resources to navigate this pain in the ideal or desired way of what's required for us to develop, our bodies develop in relationship to that environment. So if lack of control or not being good enough is very common for us when we're kids, that's what our bodies developed into. That's what our perceptions developed from. That's what our neural patterns, our emotional circuits, all of our hormonal systems developed in relationship to. So when we're adults, that's the baseline for us. So we have to spend a good amount of time each day being present with ourselves, being conscious of what we're thinking, what we're perceiving, what we're feeling, what we're doing. And we have to exercise our ability to make choices, to take responsibility, and to liberate ourselves from those old patterns. And this is not something that I think that we ever stop doing. And I can say that it's absolutely worth it. This is what life is. It's about learning, it's about growth, it's about experiencing and engaging with life. It's about change and development. And to disconnect from that is to cut ourselves off, not just from ourselves, but from life. So you mentioned a great question, which is if I didn't have this addiction or this adaptation, who would I be? Well, these adaptations, these patterns, these addictions, they're just layers of survival mechanisms, adaptations that protected us from pain when we were younger. They helped us, but they don't help us anymore. In fact, they hinder us, they harm us in lots of ways. So, as we peel back those layers of personality, of adaptation, what we uncover is who we actually are, who we would have been, or who we are without having to adapt to all of that pain. We recover ourselves in a way. And when somebody heals from an addiction, we say that they're in recovery. To recover means to find something that you've lost. What do we recover? It's who we were before the pain. We become more of ourselves. Um, and I don't know what's more worth living for than recovering who we were before all of these adaptations. This is a way of being authentic and being genuine to who we are and navigating this world in much more authentic, genuine, expressive ways that are in line with who we are and who we've developed to become as a human being.
What ways do you have that you've seen are effective to cultivate more presence in your day?
How personal do you want to get here?
I'm not holding back anything. The floor is yours.
So let me ask you. You said that you're successful and you're fairly busy too. I think you already might have answered this, but what does that do for you?
I'll have to take a moment to think of that. I didn't know this was a therapy session for myself. Um,
Whatever you're comfortable with too.
what does that do for me? It gives me a sense of control, honestly. Um, I'm a health coach, and the main thing that I struggle for is I just want to be able to control my life, period. If there was an answer that I could give, very simply, that would be it. I know that I can't control what goes on the outside, can't control other people. Um, Working with others, I've had in the past where I kind of wanted to control their behaviors and I would get upset if they wouldn't necessarily follow suit. But I understand now it kind of just isn't their time. You can lead a horse to water. But for myself, the thing that pops up the most would just be control.
Control my life, and there's times where I want to control others. Now, the next question is, and you've already answered this one too, but what happened in your life that developed that need for control to control your life and to control others?
I mean, my literal first moments on this planet,
Right.
and it's not an uncommon story. Um, my
Of
wife
course.
is a doula. She's also pregnant right now too. I've seen a lot of her coursework, and I understand just how traumatic birth is, not only for mom, not only for dad, but for the baby as well, and how this is such a sacred process that has been kind of bastardized, to use that word. Um, we come into this world not starting on the right foot, in my opinion. So, for something as traumatic as being ripped away from your mother's own heartbeat, the woman or the heartbeat that you heard for 10 months while you're in the womb, and then that sensation's just gone, it's not really easy to repair that. So, my way of surviving was I need some type of control. I need to have some type of anchor. I need some type of foundation that I can ground myself to because I had no control.
Absolutely. So, one last question, and then we'll tie this all together. Was when this was happening, when you were navigating this incredibly traumatic, difficult time, what was the message? What was the belief about yourself that you developed?
Mm, what I would imagine would be that I wasn't loved, similar to
I wasn't loved.
that I wasn't wanted.
I wasn't
Again,
wanted. I'm
as
not
an
good enough.
adult, though, as an adult, I could kind of validate and justify it. So, a little bit more background. My father was 13 years old, and my mother was 14 years old at the time. So, as an adult, or once I understood this, it's like I don't blame them. I could totally see that they were not fit to raise a child at the time. And cool story, this could honestly make like a Lifetime movie one day. I was able to meet my biological family. We have a relationship now, so we visit them each Easter. I have not visited my biological mother, but we have spoken. So, and the first thing that I told her when she reached out through Facebook Messenger is like, "Thank you for giving me a chance at life." Simple, because it could have went another way where I was just aborted. So from a very young age, I've just been grateful. Grateful for every day on this planet, grateful that I'm able to wake up, see the world, experience it, breathe, be here. So that kind of weighs on me too. It's like I could not be here. So I want to make the most of it. I want to make the best of it.
There's a part of you now that understands what happened and is grateful. But there's also another part of you that carries around the pain of the lack of control, the not being needed, not being wanted, not being good enough. And so the being busy, the being successful, the doing all the things, that provides relief and control for this part of you here that believes that you're not good enough, because that still exists today. Okay. Now, your question was about how do we cultivate presence with that? So I'm not saying this to criticize by any means. This is what I would do with somebody here, which is what do you think the message to your children is when you're busy with work and you're occupied and stressed with all the things that you're doing out there?
Same exact thing. It hits me every single day that I walk out the door. And that's partly or a major reason why I have this platform, ideally for more exposure. And then that way I can be able to spend more time with just being fully transparent to generate more of a passive income so I don't need to be away so much. Because the moment when he wants to go to work with me, which thankfully I do have um, very understanding clients, and my son's a little sweetheart. He plays around. I'm able to actually bring him to some sessions. So I'm grateful
Mhm.
for that situation as well. But ultimately, yeah, when I hear him cry when I leave the door and he wants to come with me, each step that I take to my truck before I head to work, I'm thinking about that in my head. It's like I could be there. So it's kind of strange because the way that society is set up, you see this. We there's not really much maternal or paternal leave as soon as a baby's born. You also see 9 to 5 jobs. And then what happens when your kid comes of age, they're going to school. So you're not even raising your own child anymore. The school is raising your child. Who knows what type of information that they're instilling within them? I call it indoctrination camps, to be frank. And then when you come home, there's a great book on this. It's called Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. It's the school and the television raising your children. So 9 to 5 job, kids have been away all day. You come home, you just want to take it easy, sit back, relax, turn on the tube, numb out, and then it's just like an endless cycle. So society, if you're working those jobs, kind of lends to this, and then we're just breeding more and more of this. We're breeding people that don't know how to feel. They're kind of just they lack autonomy. And I'm not trying to criticize the masses here, but it's just what I see. It's an observation. I've been there. I was in this. I'm still playing my part because I still have to head to work. I don't know how society would necessarily operate without those conditions, which is kind of strange.
Well, coming back to being present with our pain, with these patterns, with the intergenerational trauma that we were handed, you can see that the adaptation that you have to dealing with the pain is also getting handed to the next generation. And there's only so much control that you can have over that. There's only so much that you can do inside of that. When you're leaving, the message to your child is, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. The job's more important than I am. So the same pain that's inside of you gets handed down to the next generation. Now, it's very clear that that's not what you want, and that you're taking a lot of action to do things differently. So, how do we be present with that? Well, what we want to do is we want to be very aware of it, just like you're talking about doing. You think about it constantly, and we want to exercise choices in this matter. Now, there's a lot of things that are out of our control. The children get sent off to school. They're being taught by all of these teachers who are being controlled, and the lessons are handed down from these institutions that do not have your best interest at heart. The peer circle with your children is going to become their guiding star. So, what we have to do is we have to be very present with that disconnection that's happening. And when you come home and you're stressed and you're tired, you have to process that right away. You have to really work with that. You have to be present with those feelings. And then you have to dedicate the energy that you have inside of you, your attention, your capacity. You have to reserve and nurture your capacity so that way you can give it to your children. Because at the end of the day, when they're spending the day out at school and you're at work, you have to win them back. You have to cultivate enough of a nurturing relationship with them that they want to come back under your wing, that this is the safe place where they can always return to, where they're always welcome, where they're always going to be nurtured, rather than having to find that out in the world where it's very dangerous and where it is not gonna, where it's not in their interest, where nobody's going to give them the actual nurturing that they need. They need to come and get that from you. So we need to be constantly present with this original pain of not being good enough, and seeing how we're enacting it in the world and how we're navigating this and how we're trying to meet the needs of not being good enough. And then we need to see how this spreads to the next generation. I got news for you, James. You're always going to be good enough for your son. You're always going to be more than enough as long as you have the capacity and the energy to be there with him and to be nurturing and connected to him in the ways that you needed,
Mm.
right? And the more that we can be present with that and the more that we can do that, the more that we can really start to resolve and heal and process this pain that we carry around.
I like that, bro. I I did not expect to go deep in my life on this, but I'm totally open to it. And so I appreciate that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Why do you feel like we are so driven to escape distress? So I know that it starts at a young age. It's probably redundant to ask this question. Um, but why is that? Or a better way to phrase this would be through your therapy, why do the psychedelics work? You've researched the science. Why does it give us this opportunity to view ourselves and reconnect with ourselves?
Psychedelics are very good at very specific things. There's um, consistent traits or personality traits of a psychedelic. One of them is that it brings things to our awareness, things that might have been outside of our awareness that we might have been unconscious to. So, depending on which psychedelic we're working with, it might be a plant that we've co evolved with for millions or perhaps even billions of years. This is always contested how long history is, but it's not contested of that we have co-evolved with these fungi, these vines, these leaves, these various plants to have this psychedelic experience, which the word psychedelic essentially means a deep connection to yourself. So we plug into the network of this world and we connect deeper with this world and we connect deeper with ourselves through it. Another thing that the psychedelic is very good at is writing new patterns and writing new patterns very quickly. We can call this neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, so on and so forth. New neural patterns being written very quickly and reinforced at a quick rate as well. So, when we do our therapy, the goal is to have a psychedelic experience where we connect deeply with ourselves through other means than working with a psychedelic substance. So, through the inquiry, self reflection, through connecting with the feelings in our body, connecting with those pains that we carry around, those beliefs, and building a practice daily of connecting with them, checking in with them, identifying, recognizing these feelings, processing them, expressing them, and comforting and soothing them, we can do both of those main traits of the psychedelic on our own. We can go deeper and deeper and find new pains, new emotions, new beliefs about ourselves. And we can see how those same old familiar beliefs and emotions show up in different ways. Or, in other words, how the pain from the past continues to show up in the present. And we can continue to make choices to not follow that same old pattern of depression, stuffing it down or disconnecting from it, or trying our hardest to mitigate it by being important, so on. And we can do something completely different. So we can create these new patterns, these new neural structures by making choices daily. And when we can do those two things, and we can cultivate this practice, which doesn't just develop and mature overnight. It's something that continues to develop and mature the more that we nurture it, the more that we do it. The more that we do this practice, the more these new patterns get entrenched. And then when we work with a psychedelic, when we go in and we have that psychedelic experience with a specific psychedelic substance, we have the ability to do those two things at a much deeper capacity, at a much more precise capacity, to use it as a tool for that experience to really go in and solidify this new pattern much quicker. So it's like if the old pattern's an old river that's been flowing the entire duration of your life. So in terms of an Earth's age, it might be millions of years. The channel for the water is deep and it's concretized, right? The water flows quick and easy down this exact same path every time. So the moment that my belief of not being good enough gets activated, my defenses kick in right away. I get defensive, I get angry, I get whatever. I can identify that and I can carve a new channel for the water to flow through. And when we work with a psychedelic, in addition to doing this therapy and building this practice, is instead of having like a little pickaxe or a little shovel, we're out there with a large excavator carving this brand new channel that we want. And we can um, guide the water to flow down this way rather than the other way. And it happens much faster and much deeper when we do it this way.
Mhm. As you're explaining that, I was imagining there being like a river and then the dam, and then this is just removing that blockage.
Yeah. Another way to look at it too is when we go through pain as children, when we go through trauma, the word trauma comes from being wounded. So trauma is a literal wound. When you were taken away from your parents at a very, very early age, that was a wound. When I was abandoned by my parents at a very early age, that was a wound. And when we get wounded, we scar over. And when we develop a scar, the scar is stiff and rigid and hard. It's firm. It's numb. We don't feel as much in it. And a lot of the times, it doesn't look very pretty. That's the trauma, that's the adaptation right there. Now, when we spend a lot of time working with a scar and we nurture it and we care for it, it can become flexible again. We can regain our range of motion. We can regrow the nerve endings that we can begin to feel in those areas again. It can become soft and it can begin to look just like our normal flesh and skin. And it's exactly the same for emotional trauma and mental trauma. When we go in and we nurture these patterns, we can become very flexible in our responses. We can become softer. We can become more in tune with our feelings and connected to our feelings. We become more connected to ourselves and much more connected to others. We can heal all of these old wounds and transform them through our intention and through our daily practice.
So you stated that you don't even, it was a while back, but you stated that you don't even need the psychedelics to do so. It's just through your actions, and then the psychedelic substance can just, like an excavator, dig out that channel and help things flow better. How would you do so then? How do you think without the psychedelic it would be easier? Um, would you develop like a meditation practice? Because I feel like overall, what's worked for me, not only with like alcohol or other foods, which, speaking of foods, I had a food addiction in the past where I would eat Sour Punch straws, candy, and Monster energy drinks every single day. Like, I had cavities, my mental health was going down the drain. But then I was able to sit with myself and reflect back to why I was engaging in these things. And what I attributed to was the Monster energy drink was um, got introduced by a really, really close high school friend, which I no longer spoke with. So I was getting some type of need met through there, I guess, like a bonding experience. And then also the Sour Punch with my father, who, when I was younger, during after baseball games, if we won, I would go get a Sour Punch. So I was trying to, I see it like I was trying to revisit these experiences, or I was trying to introduce them in a way because I was uncomfortable with myself. I was anxious and I needed some type of comfort, and these were my comfort foods. So what's helped me is removing any of these substances, doing some type of elimination, and then that way seeing if I reintroduce them, how they are affecting me, whether it's positive or it's detrimental, but ultimately needing some type of pause, some type of break. Would you say that that would be necessary?
I think that you identified a good deal of the practice right there, which is the first thing you did is you reflected and you inquired, why do I need the Monster Energy drink? Why do I need the Sour Patch Kids? What does this do for me? It provides me with a sense of connection. It reminds me of of a relationship, a connection, a time where I was important, where we won the game. So I was rewarded for it. I was important. I was valued. I had my connection. And so anytime you're feeling pain throughout the day of not being good enough or the pain of losing your parents, this is a way to soothe that pain. Now, of course, that adaptation to the pain, or the way of soothing it, was also detrimental to you. It was affecting you in lots of ways. So once we see what this does for us, the addiction, in this case, the monster and the Sour Patch Kids, it provides connection, a sense of belonging, a sense of value. We can say, okay, why don't I have that already? And what can I do to meet those needs to feel important, to feel valued, and to feel connected in more healthy, constructive ways? Well, the only person who can do that is you. You're the only person who can meet those needs. And if you're distracting and staying busy to disconnect from these feelings, or you're judging and criticizing and being harsh to yourself, as so many people do, well, then we're just continuing the exact same pattern that caused the pain to begin with.
Mm.
So we can make choices to cultivate practice where I sit down, let's say, 3 times a day for 5 minutes a day. What's 15 minutes out of the day? Right? I spend way more time looking at silly videos on YouTube, just distracting myself and zoning out mentally, or channeling all my anger into all of the things that are happening in the world right now. I can cultivate 15 minutes where I make myself the priority, where I make myself important enough, where I make my care for myself important enough. And I'm going to sit down and pay attention to my emotions, that feeling of pain, of not being good enough, of not being valued and being disconnected. And I'm going to go into it, and I'm going to try to provide the comfort, the care, the connection that I really needed, that I was partially getting from the Sour Patch Kids and the monster. And if I can do that, then my need for the monster and Sour Patch Kids goes down. And further, I can really use my desire, my human need for connection. I can use that in ways to heal this intergenerational trauma. Okay, my son really needs that too. I need it as well. I have to show up for myself first, make sure that I have it, and then I can go and give it to my family as well. These are the people that are most important to me. These are the people that also need this connection. These are the people I want to be connected to. Rather than being distracted with my phone or with work or with whatever it is, I can be present now because I've identified the pain. I've worked on soothing it. And now I'm making choices on how I will express it.
Mhm.
You nailed it.
I really don't know how that thought even popped up in my mind because this was well before any psychedelics. I guess I pretty much just hit a wall and I needed some type of change, and it caused me to take a stop and wonder right after I asked you the questions, like, just ask why. Like, why am I doing this? So, with that in mind, what would be some non-substance based addictions that people struggle with? Things that people wouldn't even consider it. So you mentioned earlier how you kind of overcompensated by reading and being a little bit more intellectual, as I myself would say that I am dealing with. Mm. But what are some other actions or behaviors that commonly come up that you've seen?
Yeah, so for me, it was the intellectualizing. It was very dangerous situations. It was high adrenaline sports, very high risk sports, combative sports, things like that. Um, Internet scrolling, YouTube videos, things like that. Relationships, sex. I meet a lot of people that get addicted to food, as you mentioned. Um, the internet, gambling, sex, you name it. Anything that provides a short term relief but causes us long term harm. And that's what I would define an addiction as. So there's the short term relief, there's a craving of it. And despite the long term harm, there's an inability to give it up. Anything that's in our lives in that sense, it would fit the bill of, of an addiction.
Short term relief for long term pain, you said?
Yeah, short term relief and long-term harm.
Long term.
So, monster, Sour Patch Kids, short-term relief, long-term harm,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
The alcohol, right? Short-term relief, it numbs the pain, it gives me peace of mind, it gives me social connection. Long-term harm, I sacrifice my health, I lose my job, I lose my family, I do all sorts of risky behaviors that I wouldn't have done otherwise. Short-term relief, long-term harm, inability to give it up despite the long-term consequences, relapse, going back to it over and over again. So we have to meet those needs, the reason why they're there in the first place, the pain, the beliefs, the patterns that this addiction is trying to meet.
Earlier, you mentioned how the environment is going to kind of just shape or mold kids, like how they feel safe, and then the body's going to follow. One of my mentors, he mentioned something that really stuck out to me was environment dictates behavior. And why I'm bringing this up is because I actually had a really close childhood friend when I was in college. I just did a random Google search. I want to see what he was up to. And then come to find out that he was actually growing psychedelics in his dorm room. And the DEA found this out. They were going to do a raid and he was going to go to prison. He was not really the person that would be fit for prison life. So he ended up committing suicide. His parents were obviously devastated and they were trying to work towards like funding to make these type of things legalized, which I think it's becoming a little bit more commonplace where they're not legal. But environment dictates behavior. People don't seem to really have a place to go to for this type of healing at the moment.
Plus, so environment dictates behavior. Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely the case. And what ends up happening is we have traumatized people who went through terrible pain as a result of their environment. And well, as we saw, one very common adaptation to that is to try to gain some amount of control over your environment, to gain status, power, so on and so forth. And if you're traumatized enough, and if you can make yourself grandiose enough, and big enough, and strong and powerful enough, and you're willing to enact your will onto other people, then you get to be the president of the United States. So now we have traumatized people traumatizing more people, as the tragic story that you just mentioned with your college friend.
Mm.
Um, there are resources that are available to people. Um, you know, they're becoming more and more available, but we don't have to rely on psychedelic substances. Uh, the vast majority of my practice has nothing to do with psychedelic substances whatsoever. If somebody wants to have one of those experiences, I will help them through it, but that is not necessary.
Mhm.
We can get to those same ends, to the same results through inquiry, through meditation, through practice, persistence, conviction, dedication. And in fact, when we listen to all of the pioneers, if you will, in American culture that was in the last renaissance of psychedelics, your Ram Dass, your Terence McKenna's, um, every one of them would say the exact same thing, which is we're trying to cultivate a practice, a way of living where we get to those states all day throughout the day. We never actually leave it without having to use any external aid whatsoever.
Mm.
So that's always the goal. And there's lots of good therapists out there who can help people through this, just like what we were doing today. Of course, there's a lot of therapists who are more concerned with filling their calendars. And they will continue to validate your story and your negative self beliefs and your harshness and continue that pattern, maybe consciously or maybe unconsciously, for their own economic or financial or their own trauma of I need to be important, so I need to keep my calendars full. Um, so the more that we do this practice of tuning in with ourselves and seeing these beliefs of being unworthy or not good enough, and the more that we enact choices and responsibility for our minds and our actions, the more that we can find people who can help. So yes, the environment shapes our minds.
Mhm.
Absolutely, we develop in relationship to it, but we are responsible for the minds and for the perceptions that we use to shape the environment. We're not responsible for what happened to us. You're not responsible for being put up for adoption. I'm not responsible for having parents that didn't want me. But we are responsible for what we do with that pain and how we navigate the world based on that. And the more of us that continue to do this, to take responsibility for our actions, the more spaces we can really cultivate for more people to do this.
Mhm.
Just like how we have traumatized people traumatizing people, well, we can reclaim our agency and our responsibility, and then more people can do that as well.
Yeah. Hurt people. And why I brought up the environment is it seems like we have an environment that doesn't really lend to people being autonomous. Like you just want to listen to what this person says, follow the leaders, follow the science and such. As we mentioned before, people have lost touch with their intuition, probably just due to how we've been raised and then the generational trauma that's been passed along. But we get to build a new environment, not necessarily with destroying the other, because I don't know if that's gonna be possible. People are still gonna wanna buy into that. Um, People may wanna be trapped, or they just like that life. They're addicted to it. There you go, they're addicted. It serves some type of purpose. Now, you also mentioned several times now that we don't need the psychedelics in order for this type of transformation. Since you mentioned that, when would you say that you can abuse these, medicines or these, alternatives? Because what if there's no lack of integration, and
Use
then you see someone that just constantly comes and, um when would you say it becomes abusive?
when we start to bypass, when spiritual bypass is active, meaning that we're using a psychedelic substance as a way to bypass the pain, to bypass the harshness, the self loathing, the patterns of adaptations. And this becomes just another pattern to avoid those things. During a psychedelic, it's fairly common to feel connected to the world around you and to yourself, and that can be fairly euphoric.
Yeah.
Um, and not to mention, in certain communities, there's a whole social atmosphere of being, the psychedelic guru and the person who, sits with the medicine every week or every day or whatever it is. So when we start to bypass all of the actual work that we're trying to accomplish of healing our pain, addressing our pain, sitting with our pain, and we use the psychedelic as a way to just avoid it again, that's where it becomes very dangerous. And this is very common. This is super common, not just in the psychedelic world. You'll have meditation centers with these Buddhist gurus and or all sorts of different meditation gurus, and you'll have countless allegations of sexual assault happening there. These people have bypassed all of their own trauma, all of their own pain, and they've gone straight to, I'm enlightened, I'm good, come to me, make me valuable, make me important. You can go down and work with shamans, and the exact same thing will be present there. So we have to be very, very careful of how we navigate this space. It's something to navigate with intention, care, respect, integrity, and patience. We need to be very, very careful of how we navigate this space.
Mhm. Don't just, jump into it, because then you may literally be adding a whole another layer that you need to pull yourself out of in the future. Could be even worse. How would you say that you find someone that's credible then?
When I work with people, I often ask them, "Have you ever had a gut feeling that you ignored, and then it turned out later you should have listened to it?" And just about everybody I've ever worked with says, "Oh yeah, of course." This is one of the fingerprints of trauma. We've disconnected from our gut intuition. We've disconnected from our hearts, and we're up here in the mental world, disconnected from the physical reality. The more that we can reconnect with our gut feelings, with our hearts, and cultivate trust in our own intuition, our own emotions, the more we'll know who we want to work with. I've had lots of people that I've worked with in the past where, not as clients, but where I was seeking help. And I had a gut feeling that said no. And they ignored it. And it turned out, oh, I should have listened to that. This gut feeling is here for a reason. As modern science is really starting to notice now, there's entire neural networks in the gut. We call this the second brain, or maybe even the third brain, and the heart is the first brain. This is another neural network here. And then, of course, you have this one up here. The more that we can reconnect with this, the more we'll be in tune with life. Being disconnected from this is directly in conflict with our survival. In terms of human development, we lived in nature up until the blink of an eye ago. So, how long can you survive in nature if you're disconnected from your gut intuition? If you're disconnected from your fear, if you're disconnected from your signals that are saying that's dangerous, stay away from it, you wouldn't survive. So the more that we can reconnect with this gut intuition, the easier it'll become to find people that we can work with. And the more that we can trust ourselves and to know that, to know who are the people that we really can work with, the easier it'll be to find them.
Mhm. What keeps coming up for me is connection. So you mentioned disconnected as a child. You also mentioned how like mushrooms could be essentially like the code. Like the code of the earth is literally instilled within it. I know you have these networks that are underground, and I've seen that mycelium can communicate with each other. So going back to the environment and it dictating behavior, when you see all these concrete buildings, you see the roads and such, you don't really even see too much green depending on where you're at. I know down in Miami, my friend lived in a high rise and he said that's the most grass here. And it's like 500 feet of grass. I feel like we've been disconnected from the earth too, from nature. And I think that just reconnecting back to that, sitting in a stream butt naked, you don't need to take a psychedelic, but just tuning in to the frequency of the earth can help us reconnect to ourselves as well. We've been disconnected from multiple layers. That's just my opinion. In one of your articles, you mentioned the fundamental human emotions. Would you be able to share what are the commonalities between those? Like, what do we all need?
So the things that we're especially disconnected from are ourselves. We're disconnected from our gut feelings, from our emotions, from our intuition, so on. We're disconnected from each other. How can you connect with somebody else if you're disconnected from yourself? We're disconnected from nature. And I'm not even talking about like really going out and being in nature. You know, people can go for a walk through the woods and not see anything. We're just completely disconnected from every aspect from it. We're disconnected from animals. We're disconnected from plants. We're disconnected from bugs. Um, yeah, there's very little connection in these cities in suburbs, and we have suburbs that just run for miles and miles of just concrete. This is again the result of multiple trauma and trauma causing trauma, and we're also disconnected from what we do, meaning that what we do doesn't represent who we are. So we find ourselves in these careers, in these jobs where we're boxed in and we're just trying to be important. We're just playing these roles to get value, to get status, to be respected by others. So reconnecting with ourselves is the first priority here, and that'll send down a trickle effect for reconnecting with others, with the world around us, and with nature or with what we do. The fundamental emotions are somewhat debated. Depending on who you talk to, they'll have different views of what the emotions are. But these are the ones that I really subscribe to, and everything else I look at as a subset or a faction of one of these emotions. We have fear, we have anger, we have sadness, we have shame, we have disgust, and we have joy. And when we disconnect from one of these, if we learned at an early age to disconnect from anger, or we learned to disconnect from fear because our parents were so scary and we needed the connection with them, so we needed to disconnect from fear so we can pursue that connection. When we disconnect from one of these, we disconnect from all of them. So we disconnect from our joy as well. There's no way to differentiate and just say, "Ah, I don't like fear, I'm going to get rid of that. Or I don't like anger, I'm going to get rid of that." Suppressing one emotion, we suppress all of them. So the more that we're disconnected from our fear, the more we're disconnected from our anger, the more we're disconnected from our pain, the more we're disconnected from our joy and our happiness. So again, reconnecting with these isn't just about reconnecting with pain, it's about really reconnecting with that sense of livelihood, that expansive joy connection in our lives. The more that we can do that, the more we can really be present with others as well and the world around us as well.
Mm. So, what are healthy ways to be able to experience them then? So, there's like anger and then there's rage. So, how can you experience feelings as an adult if you've kind of been numbed out for a while, especially if you've been on like things like SSRIs or medications? How can you safely get back into these feelings and be able to manage them to where you're not at the extremes and then you're also not just like completely stoic? How do you manage emotions?
Yeah, so there's anger, and then there's heightened anger, which would be rage, and then, there's white hot anger, which would be hatred. The anger, for instance, is an emotion that lives in the present moment, right? When somebody comes and pushes you in the street or pushes your boundaries, you feel anger right there. And when we suppress it and stuff it down, it's like chaining up a monster in the basement and throwing scraps down to it, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like setting up a pressure cooker and gradually turning up the heat and putting more and more things inside of it. It's going to pop. And, here in Portland, I see so much blind hatred. I see it all around me. Just rage that's just untethered and completely disconnected. Um, just a news story going around national news right now, which is a road rage incident,
Mhm.
rage. A motorcyclist, yelling and screaming at a car on the freeway, and then he gets run over by that car, and that car just takes off. Not uncommon. Um, you can't cross the road here in Portland without really, really looking to see if everybody is gone out of the way. Not that they're stopping for you, because they will stop and then they will just go because they're disconnected and they're on their phones while driving and they'll run you over. The fatalities of pedestrians getting hit by cars is through the roof right now. So we have so many people with these very large, huge emotions, and they're just completely disconnected from it. And it's bursting out the seams in very inappropriate ways. So, in terms of what we can do about that, the very first thing is to start to recognize the emotion, to identify it and say, I'm angry right now. I am boiling with rage or hatred, and it's consuming me. It's just bursting out the seams in very inappropriate ways. The more that we can identify it, the more that we can recognize it, the more that we can engage and relate with it. Awareness is the prerequisite for any sort of choice that you're going to make about what you're going to do with this. So once we identify and we say, I'm angry, now what? Well, if I fight it and I try to get rid of it and I try to say, it's not welcome here, I don't want to be angry, that's turning the pressure cooker up. That's chaining the monster up in the basement. That's the same pattern.
Mhm.
Carl Rogers famously said that the interesting paradox is that only when I accept myself as I am do I have the ability to change. So if I want to work with this anger, the first thing I have to do is accept I'm angry. After I accept it, I can say, well, why am I so darn angry? Oh, well, this guy cut me off or almost hit me in his car. Okay, that's what happened. Why does that make me angry? We're going to get very curious about this anger, figure out why is it here right now. So if I really look at it, I would say, okay, this guy almost hit me. He put me in danger. there was a threat. This person almost hurt me. What kind of person gets put in danger? What kind of person almost gets hurt like that? What kind of person almost gets run over?
Mm.
Somebody who's not important, somebody who doesn't matter. That guy didn't care enough when he was driving to pay attention to me. He didn't notice me, he didn't value me, he didn't respect me enough. He almost killed me. So now we found the belief of I'm unworthy, I am not good enough. That's the real threat. That's the real pain that I'm carrying around. And anger is just a way of expressing that pain that I'm carrying. So once I can see where this anger is really coming from, what purpose it serves, then I can nurture it and I can comfort it. And I can say, okay, I'm going to take care of myself in these ways, or I'm going to express this anger in healthy, constructive ways. Maybe that looks like, yelling, hey, when somebody almost hits me, but maybe it also looks like being patient and watching very carefully before I go into any intersection, no matter how small it is, to make sure that no cars are coming, because I'm valuable enough to wait 30 seconds for all the cars to pass so I can cross safely without having to worry about it. In other words, I nurture that anger and I comfort it. And when I do that, when I stand behind a pole, so that way, even if somebody's driving like a maniac, they can't hit me, and I wait until all the cars are gone and I have perfect amount of time to cross, I'm valuable. I'm cared for, I'm taken care of, and I'm so much safer. And that anger has served its purpose. I've allowed it to exist. I listened to it. I heard the wisdom. I expressed it. I did the thing that it needed me to do. And now it has passed. That's the goal in
Mm.
terms of expressing emotions. We recognize it or we identify it, we accept it, we get very curious about it, we try to figure out why is it here, what's the wisdom behind it, what purpose does it serve, what are the unmet needs that is underlying this emotion, and then we try to meet those needs in very healthy, constructive ways.
Mhm. What jumped out to me as you were explaining that, like crossing the road, is everyone wants to be seen. Everyone wants to feel valued. Everyone wants to feel like they are relevant. This is something that actually came up in a recent interview. What happens when people lose their relevance and perhaps they find unhealthy addictions like drugs and such? Now, with the anger, so it seems like there's a spectrum. So there's anger, you can address it for what it is. But if you don't, then it's gonna be like the pressure cooker where it just wants to explode. And by just acknowledging it for what it is, which I think all this is gonna be great for my kid, by the way, too. Getting him to understand what he's actually feeling, putting a name or some type of label on whatever frustration or uncomfortableness that he's experiencing. But with anger, hatred, do you feel like there's a unhealthy spectrum for other emotions too, like happiness and then euphoria, where someone is on top of the world and then all of a sudden they just feel like they can fly and end up jumping off a building? So do we need to dial the other emotions down too? Does that kind of spectrum exist for those other ones as well?
So, identifying the emotions, giving the names to them, allowing them to exist, accepting that they're there, validating, reaffirming them, and getting to know them and processing them. What I find, and what people that I work with also find, is that the intensity dissipates very quickly. So if your son is throwing a tantrum because he wants to get ice cream or a cookie before dinner, if you're doing any parenting, you probably won't give him the ice cream or the cookie before dinner. Parenting requires a certain amount of guidance. And uh, when you're guiding a child and they want it a certain way, chances are you're going to provoke their anger. So if we can learn to identify that anger and say, oh, yes, you're really angry, aren't you? Yeah, you're really angry because you want this cookie or ice cream, and I'm saying you can't have it before dinner. Yeah, you're really mad at me, aren't you? Yeah. Oh, you're allowed to be angry. Come here. I'm not going to disconnect from you because of that. And you offer him some comfort. You allow him to be angry at you and to voice those things. Then we find that the spectrum is not so intense. This young child learns at an early age, oh, this is anger. This is how I voice it. This is why I'm feeling it. And just because I'm angry doesn't mean that I have to get my way. But when we spend a lifetime repressing that anger and repressing all of our emotions, yeah, we find that they're very volatile and the intensity is very high on these and it swings very quickly. So you can find, somebody laughing hysterically, psychotically, maniacally, and then, grieving the loss of somebody very important to them right after, and then going right back to the hysterical laughing. um, we're very disconnected from our emotions right now, and the repression of these is causing the intensity of them to come up. And the more that we repress them, the more they burst out the seams.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of it comes down to really identifying the emotion and understanding what is the purpose of this emotion here, and seeing if we can meet those needs in constructive ways. When we do that, the intensity chills out quite a bit.
Mhm. It's similar to what we were talking about earlier, how like when you resist it, then it has more control over you.
Precisely.
How can we then use painful emotions, so grief, sorrow, as an opportunity for growth or connection or
Mm.
joy?
Grief. What are the situations where we almost always feel grief? Loss. So, in other words, the feeling of loss means that there was a connection that was very valuable and it's no longer here. So, the grief is here to give us a signal, pain, that is reminding ourselves or drawing attention to the fact that there was or is a very important relationship to us. So, this grief is not something to be avoided or to be suppressed, but rather we can use this grief as an opportunity to be present with our important connections. So, for instance, I have one dog right now who's 15 years old, and I had another dog. He passed in 2017. He was 12 and a half. And I got these dogs I got one of them when I was 18 years old. My ability to be present with them and to be nurturing for them was minimal at the time. But over the years, I really developed the capacity to be present with them. The more present that I can be with the people that I care for the most, that I'm connected to, or just being present in general, the less pain that I feel when that's lost. Of course, that doesn't mean that I don't feel pain. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to feel pain when my 15-year-old dog passes. She's one of the most important people in the world to me. But that pain is an indication of all the joy, all of the wonderful connection that I had. So if I can be really present with that wonderful connection, all the joy, all the happiness, all the beautiful moments, rather than being disconnected and distracted and not present, this grief is just a sign, it's just a signal that's pointing me back to the present moment. And if we can listen to all of those, we might call them negative emotions, the anger, the sadness, the disgust, the shame, the pain, all of those, each one of those is just pointing us closer and closer to the present moment. The more present that we can be with them, we see that they're just fleeting emotions, signals from our body that are telling us one way or another to engage with this world around us. The more present we can be in this moment, the less threatening and the less um, controlling and overwhelming these emotions become.
Have you seen these suppressed emotions show up as physical pain?
Of course, of course. In my own personal journey, repressing all of my pain, all of my fear, my anger, and then having tremendous amounts of shame manifested as physical illness for me as well, and pushed me to the brink of survival. It wasn't until I really started to focus in on those emotions and listen to them and process them where my physical symptoms resolved. And I work with lots of people. They'll have chronic pain, they'll have all sorts of physical ailments or physical disease. Almost every one of these physical diseases that I work with the exception of very few genetic ones that are synthesized by specific, genetic proteins or mutations, almost every single one of them is a result of the environment and our way of engaging with that environment. So the more that we repress our emotions, the more that our physical symptoms in our body are going to get intense, drawing our attention to those repressed emotions. It's our body's way of saying no. And if we don't listen to that, those physical illnesses will get more and more intense. And I've seen it claim people's lives. And I've also seen people identify them and work with them and heal them in a relatively short amount of time.
Mhm. How this personally showed up for me is I was having some elbow pain. I dislocated this elbow during like some stunt a few years ago. And then after a breakup, I went to go see a physical therapist because it was killing me. It was terrible pain. And the therapist, she did some acupuncture work. She mentioned, what's going on? Did you have like a loss or did you break up or something recently? It's like, how'd you know that? I never disconnected, that what I'm experiencing here doesn't necessarily have to be physical, doesn't have to be structural. It could be something that's mental and I'm just trying to kind of bury. And this is something since then, that point that I try to bring up to my clients where if it's not going away and you've made all these other changes, then it could be something else that you're not addressing. You're not taking the time to sit with yourself because I feel like if we all take the time to actually sit and ask ourselves the hard questions, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, self inquiry, like asking yourself deep questions, the answers are already there. You already know the answers.
There's physiological feelings with every emotion. Like when you get angry, your body responds to it in a certain way. When like your heart will beat faster, your muscles will grow tenser, your body temperature will go up. When you feel fear, your stomach contracts or constricts. You might grow very cold. When you feel disgust, you might feel it in your stomach. Shame might be in your throat. There's always a physiological correlation with all of these emotions. And the more that we suppress the emotion, the more those feelings will increase in intensity. These are signals from the body. Each one of those emotions is telling us something very important about how we're engaging with the environment. The more we ignore them, the more intense they get. And a lot of physical pain, as you're noticing, is directly correlated with some sort of emotional or mental pain that we're feeling as well. That was a message that I got very early on in terms of my own practice, which was all of this physical pain that I'm feeling from this disease is the emotional pain I've been carrying around my whole life. So if I can start to comfort, soothe, and heal that emotional pain, what will happen to the physical symptoms? Well, the physical symptoms resolved shortly afterwards. Of course, it took I'm using shortly as relative here, it took years, but the more that I was able to pay attention to them and connect with them, the more that they resolve. And when I get very stressed or dealing with difficulties today, the more I can pay attention to and soothe those emotions, the quicker the physical pain goes away as well or resolves as well.
Yeah, we've had quite the technical challenges today, but I really do appreciate your patience with this new setup, brother. Um,
Mhm.
and I've loved this conversation. I'm glad you could bring this to my platform. Where would people be able to find you and your work, Julian? How could they work with you if they're looking for your psychedelic integration therapy?
My website's the easiest way, and I'll give that to you. I think you might already have it because you were talking about the articles and stuff. So, yeah, we can link that if you'd like.
Perfect. Are you on social media at all? Instagram or
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point. I'm so bad at social media that I forget that it's even there. Yeah, we have an Instagram as well, and I'm starting to put a lot more clips and messages up there too, so people can follow me on that as well. I'll link that as well if you'd like.
awesome. Cool. Well, it's been a absolute pleasure, brother. You've brought up some stuff for myself. I'm gonna reflect back on this. And honestly, as a parent, I feel like this is a very important topic because it all starts when you're a kid. And if this type of stuff is not addressed and you just repeat the patterns that have been instilled within you, it's going to carry on more and more of this. And I do believe that kind of at the tipping point now when people want different. People are seeking some type of change. They may not know exactly what it is, but I feel like it's right on the cusp. And I personally believe that we don't need to be living with all this pain, all this disease. I don't think life was meant to be this way. So I really appreciate what you're doing, brother. Thank you for your clarity again. Very well spoken. And if you be open to it, I would love to have you back on in the future.
Yeah, feel free to reach out anytime. I'd love to connect. Really nice chatting with you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, brother.